application. This is kind of a cool one. It could be used almost in B2B as well if you do any web development or any brochure design. If you're looking for inspiration on color schemes, I mean, even if you wanted to paint your apartment, you could look at this as a way to get some inspiration on colors that work nicely together. So this is Adobe Color or Cooler. I've heard it referred to both ways. It's an application that's almost like a painter's palette that sits on your desktop, and it tells you some of the most popular or highest rated or most used color combinations, and it shows you 5 different colors that are complementary to each other that you could look at using in your design. So it's kind of a neat little small application. If we're looking at business-to-business applications with AIR, most of the applications we've seen so far in the business-to-business realm have really been around improving productivity and improving access to information and other applications. So if we look at business-to-business, it's how to extend the applications that you have today on the web back to the desktop for 24/7 operation. So if we look at some of the examples we've seen Salesforce.com come out with a utility that allows you to enter client data. We've seen web-based CRMs, we've seen data collection forms, dashboards, directories, those types of applications. So we're going to take a look at a few of these in more detail. The first one that I mentioned here is the employee directory application. This is kind of a proof of concept application that was made available as source code, but it's a nice example of how in a business-to-business environment or an internal environment within an organization that this type of technology works quite nicely. So with a little icon that sits on the desktop, it launches an employee directory. So I can say, oh, I'd like to get a hold of Carrie or of Christina. So I start to type in the first few letters of their name, and it shows me all of the different options of contacts. So I choose a contact, and then once I've chosen that contact, it brings up the full profile of that contact with phone information, email, etc. And I can actually jump in and say, you know, I need to schedule a meeting with Anthony. When is he available? Well, I see the afternoon's not too good for Anthony, so maybe 10 o'clock I'll send him a meeting request for. So this is an example of an application that is a desktop application, ties into Outlook calendars and system information, and provides that quick snapshot of just the information that the user's looking for. Here another example of the same type of application. This is from Google Analytics. If you use Google Analytics to capture information about your website, you'll know that you have to go online and log into your Gmail account or to your Google account in order to get access to Google Analytics. What this is a small desktop application that they've designed that allows you to pull up your profile in Google Analytics and access it quickly whenever you want. So you can just say, okay, I'd like a quick snapshot on how's the web traffic going, and you can pull that in by visits, by pages. You can choose different timelines, pretty much all the basic functionality you'd want out of Google Analytics, but just available quickly from your desktop. So that's another great example. And this example, I wanted to just, it really could be business to business, business to consumer, it could be internal. It's a great little tool for time management. So if you are working in an agency and you don't have a time management solution in place, or if you're working as a freelancer and you want to track all of the work you're doing on multiple projects, this is a really visual time management tool that you can just block off time in your calendar and enter in your project information and track how long you're spending on each of the different elements of a project. So it's a great little time management tool called Clock. So you can download that. I'll show you the URLs for all of these applications at the end. So now that we've seen a couple of examples, I just wanted to get some detail into the benefits of AIR. So what we've seen and what AIR really delivers well is that creation of a rich experience. So all of the items we've looked at, they have a nice visual appeal to them, they have a lot of graphics, they have a lot of interactivity to them. They're very customized in their branding, so you'll see on each of the applications it has a different chrome, different level of transparency. Some of them are really, black and high-tech looking. Some of them are very consumer brand oriented and very familiar to what you're accustomed to with the brands that are associated with the applications. And what they've done nicely is they provide that desktop integration. So in a lot of them you can drag and drop, you can set your notifications, you can cut and paste information. So if you, for example, were using Clock and you have a summary of the project you're working on in Word, you just cut and paste it and toss it into the text box, so you don't have to worry about retyping or re-entering data. You'll also see that they do have a very broad reach. So when we're looking at AIR applications, they support Windows and Mac systems, and when I say here planned support for Linux, just to update you on that, they did release a beta of AIR for Linux last week, so that's available on the Adobe Lab site if you are working with AIR or starting to work with AIR and you need support for Linux. That is already in the works. What's quite nice is there's the ability to leverage a one-time universal application installer, and we're going to see some more slides about the install process a little bit later. There's also support for online and offline applications. Anything you've seen today, the eBay desktop, any of those types of applications, if you pull out the connection for the internet, they're still going to work. They're not going to give you 100 error messages. It's just going to say perhaps you're working offline. It gives you some sort of ability to understand that there's no longer a connection for live actions. However, you do still have access to all of the data. The ability to access local files and data is also really key. And the one that's really, I think a lot of you today are developers and you're on the line, so that ability to provide that efficient design and developer workflow is also key. So your team that's already working with technology such as Flash and Dreamweaver and Ajax and HTML and Flex and all of these tools, you don't necessarily have to think about another set of technologies for development. You can reuse the assets you're creating, you can push out application updates when you need to, and you can develop ones and deploy across many different applications and platforms. So that's really the key with AIR, is it helps to bring that design developer workflow a little closer together. Now, if we're looking at all of these benefits, there's always a couple of flags that we need to raise as well. So when we're talking about what you need to consider when you're developing for AIR, there are three key elements we're going to cover. We're going to look at the first one, which is value. So when you're talking about an AIR application, the thing that's different about an AIR application versus an RIA that runs on the web is that it's a shift in the way that you're interacting with that client. So it's no longer a pull-based environment where the client goes to the web, looks for information, and pulls that out and extracts it and does what they wish with it. With an AIR application, it's you pushing out content to the user. So that's a change in the way that you're interacting with the user. So in order for that user to accept that push of information, there has to be value for that user in that content or that experience. So users don't selectively choose this. They are being given information. So they're being given information in exchange for giving up really valuable desktop real estate. So you'll want to make sure that when you're designing an experience that uses AIR and touches the user on their own desktop, that you really think through what the value is for that consumer. Why would they install your application? What are they going to get for it? That's always the big question, because desktop real estate is quite limited. If you're asking for a chunk of that space and a chunk of their attention on a daily basis, then you've got to really prove the value of what you're delivering. If we're talking about factors to consider, the other one is trust. So in looking at with an RIA that runs in a browser, that browser itself is the police person, as we've mentioned before. So, you may trust Firefox, you may trust Internet Explorer, but are you going to trust an application that directly has access to your hard drive and directly has access to cut and paste off your clipboard if you don't know the company? So the thing you'll want to keep in mind is when you're designing the experiences with AIR, it should be designed in a fashion that you're working with an audience you already know and are interacting with. So I wouldn't necessarily think off the bat of using AIR as a way to improve client acquisition. It's a great way to build loyalty, to build relationships with clients that you already have a relationship with, as well as an organization, you should make sure you act responsibly in informing users what information you're using on their system, on explaining how that interaction is taking place. So it's really important that you establish that trust with an AIR application, because you are having a direct relationship with your clients. And as well, there is just something to bring up, which is there is a small barrier to entry with AIR in that there is a one-time software install. And if the user does not already have AIR installed, AIR kind of acts like Flash Player. So if you're pushing out Flash content, you know that if your user doesn't have Flash Player installed, that they have to install it. So AIR is very similar in that sense, in that there is a client-side application that needs to be installed. However, unlike Flash Player, you can install the AIR component within your install process. So the first time it'll say, would you like to install AIR? Yes. Would you like to install this application? Yes. And if they already have AIR installed, it will just be, we found that you have AIR. Would you like to install this application? So we're going to look at, sorry about that, we're going to look at some of that in the next couple of slides. So once AIR is there, it can be leveraged. And Adobe is doing quite a bit to push the spread of AIR, just like they did with Flash Player. So, they're expecting that they're going to see a large penetration of installations by next year. So I think, you'll start to see the same sort of numbers as you saw with Flash Player. So with